Please, please take me. I was wrong. Make me Swamp Thing again. I was too late. Too late. Today on the Comic Book Report, Swamp Thing, the new 52 Omnibus. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm excited to review a DC Omnibus for all of you. That's right, we're getting back into the swamp with the new 52's run on Swamp Thing. This has been a run I've been wanting to finish for a decade now, I would say. I started reading this shortly after it came out, maybe got a dozen issues in, and never quite finished the run. But I've had an opportunity to now, and I can't wait to jump in and share my thoughts. Before I do though, I do want to say a thank you and shout out the channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions like this omnibus here, I encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything on the site you like, you can actually use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to receive $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's Omnibus review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written primarily by Scott Snyder, Charles Soule, and more, and illustrated primarily by Yannick Paquet, Jesus Saiz, and more. The comics in this volume were published by DC Comics beginning in 2011. The volume itself collects Swamp Thing issues 0 through 40, 23.1, Swamp Thing Annual issues 1 through 3, Swamp Thing Future's End issue 1, Animal Man issues 12 and 17, and finally Aquaman issue 31. Now this is an oversized hardcover edition with nice glossy print paper stock, a glued binding, and a total of 1,160 pages. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that front cover for the Swamp Thing New 52 Omnibus from DC, and I gotta say, I do love the dust jacket design for this omnibus. I think the cover is so striking and just really true to the interior art we get in this omnibus, especially in those first couple arcs. A beautiful, beautiful cover here, absolutely captivating. As we transition to the spine of this omnibus, I will say I'm a fan of the spine as well. We get a great picture of Swampy near the top, some vibrant green font that just bursts out saying Swamp Thing, and even the little New 52 writing, which really matches nicely with something like the Justice League New 52 omnibuses, or a lot of the other New 52 omnibuses they've released, so I really like the consistency there. The back cover as well is really cool and evocative. We have kind of a watermarked, I'll say, almost, of the Swamp Thing. Maybe not watermarked, but kind of as a background. Blurb about the book, pricing, things like that. Overall, I think that this was a really well-produced and honestly ornate and beautiful dust jacket. I think DC did a phenomenal job here. Speaking of that dust jacket, I did want to spend one final minute looking at it. This time I'll go ahead and show you the interior flaps. I'll go ahead and open it all up so you can see everything spread and at a glance. I will say it looks beautiful when you spread it out as well. The back cover and kind of the flap also makes sort of a wraparound in a really cool way. I think all the color palettes they used for the different greens and almost teal, the kind of pink lettering, I think just everything really pops in this dust jacket. Like I said, a very, very beautiful design. Absolutely consistent with some of the artwork. Transitioning to the hardback book itself and the graphics or art we have printed on that, I will say there's a lot of continuity visually between the dust jacket and the hardback book as far as the coloring and kind of font choices, things like that. We don't have any real proper kind of art of Swamp Thing or any art that was necessarily lifted from like an action scene or anything like that. We just have kind of ornate design work, a lot of the same colors. We have maybe some tree branches as well. But I think this was all done really well. I really like the make and exterior of this book. And now for all you prospective collectors out there, I did want to spend a moment examining the binding. So as I mentioned, this is a glued binding, and at just shy of 1,200 pages, this is a pretty big omnibus. We did get a little bit of an eye, and I think for such a stiff glued binding, it did lay down and open itself quite well. I did have moments of gutter loss a bit, but if I pushed down the pages, it wasn't really a huge deal breaker or anything like that. Would have loved to seen sewn binding, but didn't really expect that from DC. Okay, now we can go ahead and transition into the book itself, and right away I'll say even the end pages, everything about this book is just beautiful. We get the title page, publication information, things like that. Now, we don't have a proper table of contents, but we do have a kind of creator breakdown page, and I was elated to see we also start with an introduction by Len Wein, one of the co-creators of Swamp Thing. Love to see that. Just a little blurb or essay at the front as an introduction. I think that this was a really nice feature that I don't always see in modern omnibuses, although I'd love to see more and more of it. And after that, we're off to the races with the New 52 Swamp Thing, issue 1, and we just start going. And we have Alec Holland back from the dead, and he now is awakened as just a human. You know, he's no longer Swamp Thing, and as we know from the Alan Moore run, this is a minor spoiler, he never was Swamp Thing. So we find out that the Swamp Thing that's been around for a long time was a plant itself who thought it was Alex Holland, who had the consciousness of Alec Holland, but was not Alec Holland himself. It was like a plant that was given kind of the mind of Alec Holland. But now in the New 52, we have Alec Holland proper, back from the dead, but now he has the memories of the time as Swamp Thing, even though they're not really exactly his memories. He was never Swamp Thing. And so we have some weird things going around the world, weird things happening with life and plant life, things like that. And we have people wanting to seek out Alec Holland or the Swamp Thing. We even have Superman show up. But Alec doesn't really want to have anything to do with that. He wants to kind of avoid that life, but he's hearing the whisperings of plants in his ear, and he's struggling to grapple with this life he never actually lived. And so we have the first issue really setting up a lot of these kind of character trappings or just character moments for Alec Holland. We have this kind of built-in sense of conflict and tension just internally of who is this character now? What does he do with his life? The first issue also has him running away from his life's work of botany. We have him kind of just in construction, wanting to put that side of his life just down, wanting to kind of shut off the voices and wanting to just live his life away from the green, away from this plant life, away from arguably his destiny. And that's really what we have set up here. Another thing that should be noted right at the onset of this omnibus is that this omnibus is not afraid to lean into horror, into the more horrific elements of comic book fiction. Will I say this is a horror book? I would say the first half of the run is easily a horror action book, heavy on kind of body horror, transformational horror. If you're fans of those genres, that's something to see here. If you're not, that's something to be aware of. I will say that this run is primarily from Scott Snyder and Charles Soule, and Charles Soule takes over around the halfway point of this omnibus, maybe a little bit earlier, and I think that once we get to his run, it does shift a bit in tone. It feels a bit less dark, a bit less horrific. Yes, those elements are still kind of there, but it's dialed down quite a bit. When we have Scott Snyder right out of the gate, this is just like a straight up body horror movie that just happens to have a lot of action. So you'll see that as I flip through, there's a lot of kind of visceral detailing here. I don't think this is necessarily rated for younger readers. Of course, reader discretion advised. Back to the story, though, let's get back to that kind of overview or review of the plot. The first maybe 5 or 6 issues of the Swamp Thing omnibus are really just an origin story or kind of a re-origin story for Alec Holland. We basically have forces of darkness, now known as the Rot, which is another kingdom of life that has its own powers and avatars, is basically trying to take the supreme seat in the world, trying to overtake the other kind of forces of power, like the green for Swamp Thing and the red for kind of Animal Man's crew. We have this kind of introduction of these different powers in existence, right? We have the green, the red, bred in the Rot. And the Rot is trying to take over and make these horrible, monstrous zombie things, create a lot of just death and destruction everywhere. So, of course, the Green is whispering to Alec Holland, we need you. You're our warrior king. You're our champion. You were always the chosen one. It even kind of says, you were always supposed to be. So when you died, that's why we made the last Swamp Thing modeled after you. So we could have someone who was still kind of like you. But it needs to be a human that transitions into the Swamp Thing. That's where we have more of the power and the warrior nature for the Green avatar. So he's hearing all of this, but he's denying it. He's rejecting it. He's like, I have these memories that aren't even mine, but those memories weren't good. I don't want this life. I'm not going to be that. All the while, the Rot is after him. He encounters Abigail Arcane. Abby Arcane, his longtime love interest. Again, see the Alan Moore run on Swamp Thing amongst so many other runs. Abigail is also, I think, the niece or somehow related to his arch enemy, Anton Arcane, who at the beginning of this at least is dead still, asterisk. But we have the Rot showing up. We have this introduction of Abby's younger brother, who's sort of the avatar of the Rot in the beginning. She's trying to outrun him, trying to get Alec Holland to stop him and maybe embrace the green side of his nature. But anyway, they're on the run from the Rot in the first couple issues. We have, not only is he hearing the whispers from the Green, but we have Alec Holland actually have a tie to the Green. He can call plant life forth or vines, things like that, but his connection to it is incomplete because he's still a human. We also have, as kind of a background story device, that he still has a can of his bio-restorative formula, which was an ingredient in creating the Swamp Thing initially. So we have that in the background as kind of like, okay, what's going to happen with this? This is a plot device that's just kind of waiting. It's sort of the ticking time bomb. And so again, those first couple issues, he's kind of running away from it, and without going into too many details, he ultimately has a moment where he's begging the Green to make him the avatar. It looks like he's maybe going to die, and this is his last-ditch effort. He tells the Green, use the formula, turn me into the Swamp Thing, and lo and behold, in issue, I think 6, he becomes the Swamp Thing. He becomes the monster, and this time it feels a bit different because it was his choice, and he's a human body that's been transformed into the Swamp Thing versus just being a plant, and he's now this warrior king avatar of the Green, the chosen one stepping into arguably his birthright, and he gets swamp wings and can fly away. And now the fight is on. It's the Rot versus the Green, and that's really the first arc of this book. From there, we really quickly ramp up into the Rot World crossover event, which is a great crossover between this title, Swamp Thing, and the New 52 Animal Man run, written by Jeff Lemire, which is another kind of body horror-based series. It's no wonder that this fits so well into a crossover with Scott Snyder and Jeff Lemire here. But this event, Rot World, gets kind of set up, and we have Swamp Thing and Animal Man teaming up to try to stop the Rot once and for all. They go into the Rot's realm. The avatar for the Green, Swamp Thing, has his own kind of world, the Green, where all the plant life and, previous avatars live and things like that. Well, the Rot has its own kind of cesspool land region. It's called the Rot World. So Animal Man and Swamp Thing go in there only to find that it's basically a trap. They've been lured in there, and time has gone on without them. The world has become the Rot World. The Rot has taken over, and they essentially get spat back out. They're separated. They don't really have ties to their powers, and we follow the Swamp Thing trying to find his way back, stop Arcane, see what happened to Abby, see if she still exists, and try to save the world. Ultimately, they do, and the culmination of the Rot World event, which is a longer story arc for sure, that is really the capstone for the Scott Snyder run on this book. So I think this is like 15 to 20 issues into this book, probably, I would say. We get a couple of those Animal Man issues as well, but it's a really great comic book storyline, epic event scale kind of book, and it really works well here. And while we have the essential Animal Man issues, we don't have every Animal Man issue during the Rot World era. I presume that you would need the Omnibus for Animal Man to fill in those gaps, but you have everything you need for the storyline and then some. I think this was mapped just beautifully, and it was a really good storyline. After that, though, we transitioned to the writer Charles Soule, and I will say that I was surprised to find that while I do like Charles Soule, Scott Snyder is one of my favorite writers. I love his Batman New 52 run. I love what he's been doing, actually, with Charles Soule in Undiscovered Country lately, and so many other books that he's written. And I do like Charles Soule. There's been so many books I've read with him recently, like Parts of Thunderbolts Red, Daredevil, some Star Wars stuff, 8 Billion Genies. I'm finding more and more Soule that I'm really liking, but yet I was still so surprised when I walked away feeling like the Swamp Thing New 52 era, I actually preferred Charles Soule's hand in this. I did prefer the back half of this run a bit more. And before some of you guys tune off, because maybe you like me or a huge Scott Snyder fan, and again, his work here was really good, but why did I like the back half of this omnibus more? And it was to my surprise. I liked it more for a couple reasons. It toned down the body horror a bit, which was getting a bit dark for me personally, and it kind of just dialed that back a bit. There was still some creepy or horrific elements for sure, still some visceral action sequences with Swamp Thing and his enemies. But it transitioned into these kind of, I don't even want to say smaller scale, because there's still really epic scaled storytelling, but a lot more of the surreal, odd kind of Swamp Thing stories that I really have come to love with this franchise. I think the first half with Scott Snyder, it felt like a mix of a body horror movie with just like a summer blockbuster action movie. And I mean that in a really complimentary way. It was absolutely entertaining. If they ever did a DC animated movie or somehow adapted the whole Rot World stuff, I'd get my popcorn, I'd watch that theater movie and be so satisfied. But what Charles Soule did was he made it a bit more, I think, character-driven. It was a little more understated. It wasn't as over the top, especially initially. He also populated his run with a lot of great supporting characters, a lot of really intriguing villains throughout it, and I just thought that the storylines we were presented, they're each a couple issues each, I just thought they were really well done, well paced, and we got a lot of more smaller scale storylines. We had some great plot runners that built into bigger things as the run went, but we had a lot of great kind of more self-contained storylines that were only a couple issues or two. Like there's a great maybe 2-issue story near the beginning of Charles Soule's run called The Whiskey Tree, which is essentially a Swamp Thing, John Constantine kind of storyline that's really fantastic, I thought. We have a lot more lore building too. We have more players at the table, no longer just the Red and the Rot, but we're introduced to the Gray, which is kind of a fungus-based kingdom, and ultimately we have the Rhythm, I think, which is like a metal machine kingdom. So we have, again, more spokes in the wheel. We have a lot more great lore building. The Serene, which is like this cult that allegedly kind of pays homage to the avatars and who maybe has ways to transfer avatar consciousness into human bodies and all sorts of craziness that ensues based on that. We have a character who's been around for like 1,000 years who's seeking sanctuary with the Swamp Thing and asks her to grant her dying request. There's just so many great storylines in this Soule run that I like. We have a lot of shenanigans in the Green. We have the dismantling of the Parliament of Trees, which is sort of the ruling body in the Green that's made up of past avatars. We have basically Alec Holland's Swamp Thing just cleaning house and wanting to do it by himself. We have some of these past avatars that have gone rogue. Anyway, a lot of great stuff in his run, and I just found myself a bit more engaged as this omnibus went on, and I was actually delighted to see that. During Soule's run as well, we had a brief crossover with Aquaman that was over kind of in a flash. We basically had Swamp Thing encroaching on Aquaman's turf, kind of dealing with sea algae, but this was kind of a one-and-done little storyline and an issue or two. Nothing too remarkable, but it was fun seeing Aquaman kind of cross over with Swamp Thing. I did think that was pretty novel. But the whole omnibus as well gets wrapped up fairly nicely. I will say the very last story arc, it was almost like, I don't want to say it was overly rushed, but it had that feeling a bit. I did like the resolution overall. I was not dissatisfied, but it almost felt like it needed an issue or two to kind of have sort of an epilogue feel rather than just kind of capping it. This whole omnibus does end with the issue The Future's End, which is kind of an interesting look at a possible future in the DC universe 5 years from now. Overall, again, I think these stories are all great, but I think the very, very end was maybe not my favorite part of this omnibus, although, again, the back end of it, the back half, was still my preference, just storytelling wise. And we've gone all this way without really noting the artwork. The art we have throughout this book is fantastic. As you saw from the dust jacket, that kind of psychedelic, kaleidoscopic looking kind of artwork is really prevalent throughout Scott Snyder's run. I really like it visually. The panel layouts and how they do things, it's just really, really fascinating and phenomenal. Haven't seen much like it ever in comic books. It's really unique. Charles Soule, the artist that we have throughout his run, are a little bit more straight-laced, but absolutely gorgeous. I actually prefer the character models overall, I think, than Charles Soule run as well. I just had an easier time engaging with them. I feel like there was a lot of visual fidelity as well for that back half of the book, that it was just easier for me to engage with. Really, really liked it. There was just strong art throughout this entire book. I really can't complain. I think, like The Flash, Swamp Thing has a really great visual style that each artist on this, it's just captivating to see it. In the same way I love seeing The Flash's sense of motion and see how so many different artists try to take their stab at adapting that or kind of interpreting that. I love what they do with Swamp Thing and with how he moves through the plant life, how we see the green, and we just got so many great artists on this book, and I was super satisfied with the art all the way through. And we're already toward the back of the book. You'll see me flip through the last issue or two of this book, including that Future's End issue I mentioned. Before long, we will get to the extras, though, and I will say the extras for this book, we got a great handful of them, but it's mostly kind of behind-the-scenes artwork, outlines, different production levels of some of the art we see throughout it, character models, things like that. I would have loved to see a bit more written work on this, maybe some things from Scott Snyder or Charles Soule. I was really happy to get that introduction from Len Wein, but I was maybe hoping for a bit more of that at the back, but we still got a really healthy portion of extras. I'm by no means dissatisfied. Love seeing that as a great just end for a beautiful book here. Really well done. Yeah, just looking at the final couple pages here, we again got some production drawings and pencil work here. Love getting that behind the scenes stuff. But anyway, as I finish out this book, I think all that's left to do now is to give Swamp Thing, the New 52 Omnibus from DC Comics, a grade. For another decisive and captivating chapter in the saga of the Swamp Thing, the Comic Book Report is happy to give Swamp Thing, the New 52 Omnibus by Scott Snyder, Charles Soule, and more a B+. Easily an above-average read. I would consider this a must-read for fans of Swamp Thing, and definitely a title to consider for any fans of horror comics, body horror, or kind of the more unusual, darker side of superhero comics. A really, really great book here. A lot of fun supporting characters and villains. Some truly gorgeous artwork all the way throughout it. I think that this is really one of the crowning jewels in the New 52 reading library. I'm so happy I had a chance to finish this run out. I do think that Alan Moore's run definitely still edges this out for me, but this is by no means a run to sleep on if you're a fan of Swamp Thing. But let me know what you think in the comments. Have you read this run? Let me know all of that, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to give this video a like, a comment, and maybe share it with a friend. Thanks so much. Have a good one.